supposed to talk about stuff like this, all ready to learn when you get here, and then I hand out papers and you're all like, this is boring. All right, self-explanatory slide. I am just as surprised as y'all were. Typically, this is not my grade distribution. And so when y'all were taking the test and they were coming back, it was like counting the electoral votes. I was like, wait a minute, something's wrong here. This isn't right. This is not typically the grades that I'm used to seeing. Something is up. And so as I'm sitting there, I'm like, what did I not do? So maybe there was something in here that I didn't do. And then I spoke with a couple of students afterwards, and maybe there was something that y'all hadn't done. Now listen, I think the thing I like to be known for the most is to be fair. And when I see stuff like this tells me that I didn't do something right. And I like to make sure that that's correct. I think what happened is that most students studied this rather than studied that. Shayla's looking like I didn't study any of that. Shayla's like, where'd you get those slides from? And when I looked at the test, it seemed that most of the questions were missed in this portion of the questions that I asked. And so I want to go ahead and go over some of those. I spoke with a few students and they were like, hey, I think it was here, maybe it was there, I didn't understand this, I didn't understand that. And to have y'all start on your first exam behind the 8 ball is just not cool, just not. So a few of the things, some are mine. I was just floored how people didn't answer this question correctly, but when I was making this up this morning. So someone asked me about a study guide, and I was like, no, the study guide is in the notes. So I guess maybe you hadn't noticed, but if you write it down, I'm probably going to ask a question about that. Maybe that's a hint for the upcoming 3 modules. If you write it down, that's typically the material that you should be studying. There's a little bit else in there just to kind of look over, but mostly that stuff is what I'm going to ask. So I asked formation, I asked forming processes. We had some questions about parent material, and I was like, how did they miss this? But y'all didn't write it down. So like I can own that part, right? So let's take a step back. We had this O horizon, this very thin horizon. If you take a soil sample, how many of y'all have taken a soil sample before? If you take a soil sample, it's like kind of like the root zone. If let's say we were doing it right out here on the quad. The O horizon is going to be there's a thin little layer of organic matter. And then we have an A horizon, which is going to be a little bit darker. We have an E horizon where that material has exited from the A horizon into the next one, B, C, and then R. We typically won't see these. No one in here is in my evaluate. None of y'all have been out these things. You have to dig with a backhoe in order to see these B and C horizons, okay? I was just, when I saw that come back, I was like, how did they miss that? This is on me. This one's mine, that I didn't go over this more clearly and have y'all go through that. But those horizons are important. It tells us something about the age of the soil and something that happened with it. The diagnostic subsurface horizons, we had some people that missed this. I think this was a matching question, right? And so again, instead of making you write everything out, I just kind of had you write what the surface horizons were and hoping that you would study some of that. These soil moisture regimes kind of came into play and that's in the next question, but I had you write it down. This was the question that I asked, and the soil order thing really got a lot of people. I just don't think there was enough emphasis placed on the different characteristics of that table and how to separate those out. A lot of people missed that one. So if I have you write it down, you're probably going to see it on the exam. Everyone did fairly well on the formative element, so I was happy about that. I was like, they got those, right? Which is this little ALF that tells me it's an alpha zone. I had some students ask me about this question. That I gave you this long classification that asked you the climatic condition under which it formed. And so in this grape group, I guess I also asked that here, in this grape group, this Fragiaculales, we would see that it formed under, hold on, let's go back. Saturated low oxygen. No? Erica, looking like I know.
Yeah, I totally missed that one.
Okay, that's why I'm going back over it and giving an opportunity to kind of put that in there. Maybe I'm pretty sure that I went over that super quickly and everyone was like, yeah, I get it, it's lunchtime. That's cool, like I get it. I remember being a student, like when maybe I need to slow down some? Anybody agree? Yeah? My man's like, yes, please, you talk way too fast. I am from the South, but my dad's from the North, and it was rough growing up. But like these little Udic or Eustick or Xeric give me an indication as to what the soil moisture regime was. So we have this, the Guthrie silt loam. So if you look on Web Soil Survey, or you might talk to an agronomist or an extension agent, they'll tell you what, like they might mention what kind of soil series it is. That's just kind of, it's a silt loam, and we found most of that in, I guess in Guthrie somewhere. Maybe that's in Tennessee, maybe it's not. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. The family is composed of this fine, silty, siliceous, semi-active thermic. The typic is the subgroup, and there's only a few of those, but this great group is broken down into these three parts, and so this means it's a, anybody know what this means, the FRAGI? It's a fragipan. The AQU means it's what type of soil moisture regime? What was it? Aquic, but like low and saturated, right? Saturated and low oxygen. And what soil order? An altisol. And so that looks something more like this.
Mnemonic, so we can remember.
Oh, no, it wasn't necessarily that it was wanting to like know the mnemonic. I guess this question, asking you that it was a great group, is probably an unfair question. I can own that. But I just kind of wanted to show you where each one of these little pieces came out and where we got them from and which part they are. Now in soil classification, this would be something that we will go over a little more thoroughly, right? Because you're going to end up having to deal with soil types and classification,
Yeah.
And have to know these a little bit more and understand that a little bit better. We're not going to be pedologists, so that's kind of why I just brushed over that pretty quickly. But I also didn't want y'all to suffer the consequences of me going, they're never going to use this again, and your grade suffers for it. That's just not cool. But maybe does this make better sense? Should I have led like this? Yeah, Amanda's going, absolutely, that would have made more sense, right? And so like, that's on me. That's me going, I'm in soils, this makes perfect sense to me, and that's how that goes. So like, I can recognize that maybe I need to teach that a little bit differently and go over it a little bit more if I'm gonna test you on it. I found that most of that test was on classification rather than the formation parts of that when I looked back at it, and I felt that was unfair. That's why I think y'all studied most of the formation and not the classification. So what we're gonna do, can y'all agree with that? How many of y'all are like, yeah, I studied more of the formation? Drew's like right up off the bat. I studied more of the formation and the rock cycle and those first notes than I did the second. All right, and I put most of the second notes on there rather than the first. So let's take another exam on Wednesday in lab. Take another exam and we'll balance that back out, and I'll put some more formation questions in there and y'all study a little bit more about the classification. Does that seem fair? And if if you don't want to, yes, ma'am.
Do we have to?
You don't have to take it. I mean, if you're okay with your grade, cool. Yes, ma'am.
How much does the calculation quiz add to the exam?
The calculation quiz is 10 points bonus to the whole module. So like they're broken up in, like, it's in modules, and there's like 251 points in module 1.
Okay.
And if you got 10 on the bonus, then it would go, there's 251 points, and let's say you're at 200,
Mm-hmm.
and then you get 10, then you would have 210 points out of 251. Yes, ma'am.
So say like the fill of blank answers, and we have to like type them out. Say if we spelled something wrong or like added like an extra S at the end of the word.
Yeah, so on the extra S's, like I can get that. I can figure out when, I know what you meant. It's really difficult for me to type in. I go back and check all those. I had several students that were like, hey, I put parent materials. Y'all see how finicky iLearn is now. And so I would have to go in and try and figure out how each one of you may or may not misspell or spell a word, and have all of those in there in order for you to correct that. So as y'all were taking it and it was coming in, I was scrolling through and checking all those, and to see that if you missed it. Now, if you're just a horrible speller and you spelled magnesium, just some MAGNESSIOME, and you know what I mean? Like there were some that was like, you know what, that might have just been a typo. Well, you know. There, I can tell the difference between on whether or not like you just happen to hit a key quicker or didn't. Nickel is a difficult one because we're so used to spelling it, and Tori's like me. I misspell it because I'm so used to spelling it NICKEL or LE. Those are like minor things. Those are little minor ones that I can pick out and go, okay. Decimals and rounding off to the decimal, like when I put that question in there and I type in, what was I think it was like 42.41 or 41.51 or something like that, whatever it was. Like, if the answer doesn't go in exactly 41.51, it gets counted wrong. You put 41.5, is that really wrong? No, and some people had 41.4, like I can see, you got 43.7, something's up. I can see the difference in that, so. Those are the things that I go back and check on every single quiz and on every single exam, because I hate it. When I was in statistics, I had a teacher, and if you got if you had an extra S or didn't have an S, or the definition was not literally letter for letter, she counted the whole thing wrong. Like, you gotta be kidding me. But that's what she did. Like, and so we just learned to adapt to that. We studied super hard. We made sure that it was exactly letter for letter. But that's just not cool. That's nitpicky anal stuff that I just, because I'm a student. I remember being a student. Everyone okay with this? All right, cool. So next Wednesday, we're gonna take another exam. You can take it if you want. You don't have to if you don't want to. So. Some people did well, some people are okay with their efforts, and they're like, we're not gonna retake that and go through that headache again twice, unless I have to, so. Anybody have any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Would it be broken down into the same time frame so we'd have to sign up, or is everybody gonna meet in lab and just get on their computer and do it?
I think maybe what I'll do, yes, did you have a question as well along the same lines? Okay. I think probably what I'll do is I'll find out how many people are gonna take it, and we'll probably cut that up again. Just till we have 15 students, like as long as there's only one student at a desk, I can handle that. We had 17 at once, and Jack and I think Tate were kind of in the back. Like, I don't have a problem with that, I just don't want two students sitting next to each other, Tim and maybe Ben. I don't want Tim and Ben sitting there going, right?
And my chair wasn't a judge, so I was sitting.
Those chairs are janky. All right, next question over here.
Is it gonna be just like the last test, or is it gonna be different?
It'll be fairly similar. The questions will be the same. I might switch it up a little bit since you have access to the answers. Like, that's kind of how we have to go about testing. Like, I could have asked you to list all 12. So, I was thinking about this. If I asked you to list the 12 soil orders, I couldn't ask you any other questions about any of this other stuff. Right? Because then an alpha sol is that, like, if I went to go ask a question like, if I went to ask this question, like where I had, here's an alpha salt, here are the 12 soil orders and match them. If I asked you to list the 12 soil orders and then this question's in there, all you have to do is scroll back and look, the answer's already in the test. So like I'm kind of bound with how I'm supposed to actually assess if you know it or not. And y'all did well on the formative elements, so you did know what soil orders were. Someone else, yes ma'am.
So if for some reason we take the second test and do worse on it than we did the first test, are you gonna count like the highest grade or?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not
I
gonna
don't wanna
double,
take it,
I'm
do
not
like
gonna
fail the
double
second
whammy.
test for
You
whatever
should
reason.
not, you should not take the test the second time and do worse than you did the first time.
Can't do much work.
You got a whole nother, you know, you got the answers, you know what you did wrong. You've already studied the other half, so like I'm gonna integrate some of that first week's material, the formation, the rock cycle. I felt like I might have misled y'all a little bit and been like, oh, if you did well on the quizzes, it'll be a piece of cake. And I looked at the exam and I was like, that really isn't a piece of cake. That's a little, that's a little more tough than what I remember putting into it, so I have to take all those things into consideration. Any other questions? Drew, will you hit the stop and record that again?